The following podcast is brought to you by EaseUS Partition Master. Go to the link in the description and click on it and download EaseUS Partition Master for free to directly support the channel. And also support the channel at cdkeyoffer.com, where you can get reasonably priced Microsoft software. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on that. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I'm joined by somebody that, once again, I was just speaking with him offline. I'm really happy to bring on. Frankly, I mean, it feels like the more large Moore's Law is Dead gets, the more reach there is, the more people see one developer or engineer come on the podcast and go, well, I have some stuff I could say too and come on as well. And I think it's so important to have on as many of these people actually making the games we play, because the amount of armchair expertism out there, without just even a cursory, like maybe I should ask one of these tens of thousands of people working on these things, just blows my mind. But that's something I've always tried to work on with this channel, is actually, asking the questions to the real experts so that we understand if our preconceived notions are correct or our understanding of game development is correct. And in many ways, just to gut check if I'm just entirely full of crap, if I'm being honest too, about some of my opinions. But so I'm really excited to have you on. Your first name's Hal. I'll say that now. And I guess I'll also say, even though you're not really doing it right now, your opinions are your own, right? And aren't representation of any other company. But yeah, please introduce yourself.
Hi. Yeah. My name is Hal, and I've been a game I started games in 1995, and I'm just excited to be here and answer some questions.
Yeah, and it was interesting too. I mean, one of the things, usually, like if someone's coming on, either I'll see them somewhere talking about something, reach out to them, maybe in a forum. Hey, you say you're a developer. If you can prove it and are interested in coming on the show, I'd love to talk to you. Or they'll, like in your case, reach out to me, oftentimes with some input on, hey, this one thing you're talking about, I actually dealt with that in the past. This is what actually happened. And then, usually there's like a wave of frankly, vetting just to make sure you're a real person and not insane, if I'm being honest. Where I'm like, well, let's, make sure you can talk at all. Let's get on Skype or something, talk for 20, 30 minutes. Usually, if it's someone who ends up coming on the show, we end up talking for an entire hour just because of how many shared interests there are. But I remember one of the things that caught my ear while we were talking before was that you worked on Lego Racers, for example. That's how far it was on Nintendo 64 and PlayStation and PC. And I remember playing that when I was much younger and going, oh yeah, I love that game. And here's someone who actually worked on it, so that was such an interesting connection for me.
Yeah. Lego Racers was such a great game, and it sold it's probably the best, one of the best sellers I've worked on.
Mm.
And
how well did it sell? I mean, I'm guessing you don't have the number off the top of your head, but I was just in an era where I didn't pay attention to the sales. I was like, this game fun, I play, right?
Yeah, well, who gets to say they got paid to play with Lego bricks for 2 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Did they have those around too? And this, they just brought you a bunch of Legos to play with too while you were working on the game as well?
Yeah, we had Lego kits, but also for Christmas one year, they let us pick anything from their catalog. So a bunch of us got the remote control cars, and we were going to race them around the office, but they all ran on the same frequency.
Oh, what the? Seems like a bit of an oversight for racing.
Right. So okay. And then well, what if you buy 2 for your kids? How are you supposed to use them?
Which would be the first thing I'd think of if I was a parent, by the way, is to get one for each of them so they can play together.
Right. And so we're okay, we're a bunch of nerds. We'll just change the chip, but they're all soldered in there. So we're so we couldn't even hack it to work.
Now, speaking of hacking things, you told me that basically what you did at a lot of studios, which, as the scope between working on previous Elder Scrolls, you worked on Saints Row, Gat Out of Hell, just tons and tons of different types of games. Like, you told me that what you typically did at these studios, though, was you were the jack of all trades and the person people went to when they couldn't fix something. So, and I said that in the request for questions from the Moore's Law said community. And XTX999 writes in and says, what exactly do people come to you to fix? Were you a jack of all trades that can fix code, animations, or find that one plant that is taking up too much memory because of where it's placed? Which I've seen that before in multiple documentaries on games. So they're just like, this couch is too big. We're going to shrink it slightly to fit in the memory buffer or something.
Well, I'll use this example. My kryptonite is actually writing 3D code.
Mm-hmm.
Like I tried in college to write a 3D program, and I failed miserably using, this is for the Mac 2 with QuickDraw. So, but one day on the inside drive, it was about 2004, the head of the technology team came to me because they had a issue with Inside Drive 2004. I was not on that team, where the game would just go black.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, I think you can help me with this. And so I was like, all right. And again, even though I worked on the code that the game used, I was not on the game. So I really didn't understand. I didn't really know what they were doing. And so, but within an hour, I had the code tracked down to a single Xbox call. This is for the original Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
And that was causing the game to go black. And
so you're just really good at picking up on the patterns and like looking at the code and going, well, that's not how that should work.
Right. I helped him narrow it down to a single line. And it was a problem with the Xbox API where the hardware was getting out of sync with what the Xbox thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
The dirty bits were off. And so we submitted to Microsoft, and they're like, we would never have found this without your help. But again, it just, it took me about an hour on a project I hadn't been on to figure out what was wrong with it.
I'm sure that turned some heads then, right? I mean, Twisted Raincore writes in and says, what is the weirdest hardware or driver bug that you've had to work around?
The worst bug I had was for Hunter the Reckoning, also for the original PlayStation. Because at the time, this was still when it was new, and so all the software, the Microsoft was still working on like direct music for it. We were one of the few titles.
So it's the original Xbox, though.
Right, the original Xbox.
Okay.
We were one of the few titles using direct music, but I had this crash that I got assigned to where at the start of the game, if you jumped around for 60 minutes, the game would crash.
Okay. And always 60 and jumping around, or just any type of movement?
It was jumping around usually. That was how they... and it crashed so hard, it was in the digital processor signaling code, which means I had to use the kernel debugger, real-time kernel debugger, and not the usual Visual Studio.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a couple weeks on it, and it just went away. And I had to get the kernel debugger, which required a serial hookup and a special debugger, because the DSP was going so fast. By the time the regular debugger caught it, it was already too late.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually it went away. And I felt like the Ed Harris in Enemy at the Gates when he's trying to get the Russian sniper.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, how do you know he's not dead? I haven't killed him yet. And I was like, how do you know this isn't fixed? I'm like, I haven't fixed it.
Mm-hmm.
And but even then, I was already kind of, they wanted me to stop, and I was already at that point where I was like, I can't fix this for now. But later on, this became useful because on Saints Row Got Out of Hell, there was a bug that took 6 hours to recreate. Mm-hmm. And I took all those difficult bugs on the team because I knew a lot of times, after many years of experience, that a lot of these bugs get fixed, like that one, because other things get fixed.
Right. And so do you think that's what happened with that game on the original Xbox, though, where you just started like looking through the code, working on it, and you sent it to them, and did any like self-contained amount of code that you looked over actually end up being the thing that fixed it? Or did you just work on it sent it to them, and then everyone else updated their code, and it just happened to be gone, and you couldn't explain it.
Right. Like Microsoft was still doing direct music update. You know, they were still giving us updates for the XDK. A lot of things could have fixed it and others that, you know, could have been anything. And eventually that just got resolved and the bug went away.
You know, I'm curious actually, because you said there's an error here that wouldn't show itself with one of those examples you just gave after 6 hours. Like, that's a lot of time to be playing a game straight. I mean, even in my most like gamery times, like I would say maybe high school, early high school, especially during like summer vacation, like maybe I'd sit there. I remember playing SOCOM for like 8 hours straight one day, and I just felt like kind of weird and shaky when I ate dinner. But I was like, I almost did it to prove I could. Like, what would happen if I just played this for like an entire workday's amount of time online? And, you know, that's almost what you're talking about with a 6-hour bug, that someone would have to be sitting there playing this for 6 hours straight. Most people probably can't experience it. Like, how many bugs like that do you think are left in games where they're like, I don't know, it shows up after 12 hours, and so we're not going to fix it because we don't have time to ship the game. Like, we don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of games, Daggerfall shipped with a bug. One of the main story quests didn't clear the... It had an uninitialized flag, so the main story quest could shut down on you based on if that flag was wrong. Mm-hmm. But people wouldn't realize their game was broken for dozens of hours.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a bit different though, because it breaks the main story, though, right?
I don't have exact. I can't think of it right off the top of my head, but there are. Yeah, there's stuff. I was just reading the other day where they had some bug that they avoided.
That was similar to that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I became really good at bug fixing, or I would say one of my toolbox was, just because the code says it shouldn't happen doesn't mean it can't.
Right.
And so,
and I'm sure you've gotten into arguments with some people that built engines and stuff. Like, well, we're not supposed to be able to even have those types of bugs in this, and that's why they didn't look for it, right?
Right. And so it's kind of like Sherlock Holmes. Like, once you've ruled out the possible, only the impossible remains. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure exactly, but, it's like, we know it can't be this, so what can it be? Mm-hmm. There's something else at play here. And then you just start setting up guardrails to find it for you.
Let me ask this question here. So, between the 90s and the 2000s, when you were heavily involved in game development, I mean, and really basically up until now, because I'm sure some of you saw the early stages of things that are rolled out now, like, what would you say has changed the most about developing games? Is there I can just name, for example, it's obvious the size of games is, I mean, the teams that make them too is just ridiculously larger now. But I'm wondering if there's anything like just about the process of game development itself, and maybe it is that stands out to you. It's just, this is just entirely different than how it was in the 90s.
You have that saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Mm-hmm. Like when on Saints Row for Get Out of Hell, we had a short development schedule. And up until that point, all of the Saints Row cutscenes had been 3D. And I said, because we were going to be doing on the 360, the 360 and the PlayStation 4,
3.
Right.
Oh, wait.
Right.
If it's 2015. Oh, wait, but it was on both consoles.
It was on it was last gen. So Saints Row Get Out of Hell was going to be on the 360, the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation 4, and the Xbox One. Mm-hmm. And we had to run on all of it. And my concern with the cutscenes was because of the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360's memory limits, mm-hmm. the artists were going to have a really hard time trying to get it to fit the cutscenes into that memory. Mm-hmm. And so I said, we want to do video. And Volition saw just doing video as a larger risk than real-time cutscenes.
No, why? Because you'd have to render all of them eventually, or what? Because
they had, and now I should have, and part of me understands why, because all the times I've had to try to write a video player, which always humbles me because it should be real easy, I've ran into issues. And the Saints Row engine had a problem with videos. And so once I got into it, I understood why they had that problem. But, from their perspective, playing videos was a bigger risk than doing
because of their engine. That's funny.
Right. But they had perceived that as a larger risk to their development than doing real-time 3D cutscenes. And this was 2015.
So even back then, well, yeah, but I mean, that makes sense why that was, that was a weird cross-gen development timeline. I mean, I feel like much more so now, it's easier to kind of do for like PS4 and PS5, just with the knowledge of like, yeah, I mean, look, the PS4's CPU is just so much weaker. There's just no way this thing is running above, 30 frames, and it may even drop to 20. Whereas before, I mean, we're talking about, you're almost talking about the same CPU, but the RAM is so different that, like, I don't know how some games could possibly be running on both unless they're just not taking advantage of the next generation, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was trying to do both, going from 256 or 512 megs to 6 gigs was a big challenge.
Mm-hmm. So what was your answer, though, for how has game development changed? You're saying in general it really hasn't. It's just there's more of it, or?
Right. It's just games are larger and you still run into the same issues.
Mm-hmm. Leroy writes in and says, "Hi, guest. I'm a mobile game developer and have had to deal with the limited resources available like RAM size, and we need to get really creative sometimes because of that. Can you tell us how hard or tricky it was to deal with developing a game for a system like an N64 and the OG PlayStation at the same time? How did their specs compare to the regular," and he puts in quotes, "gaming PC back in terms of CPU and graphics horsepower and RAM?" And I don't believe, because we talked about Lego Racers for a bit offline before we recorded, and I remember you telling me that obviously, like, the PlayStation's just a lot weaker than the N64, but the N64 could have, like, 30 megabytes of storage at most on that cartridge, I think, something like that. I'm curious if you could speak a bit more about that now, like, what were the major challenges between developing for both of those? And I am curious how much easier it was to put the game on the PCs of the day back then.
Well, that's a good question, and it was something that was really fun to work on at the time. Although, the thing is what's when I started, like, I had the Apple II with 48K of memory, or my mainframe at high school had, you were limited to 32K per user. So having even 3 or 4 megs on Lego Racers was a lot, although compared to Daggerfall, which had come out a few years before, we were already at 8 megs. So trying to work on a 4 megabyte Nintendo 64 or 2 megabyte PlayStation.
And you're talking about RAM, right? 4 megabytes of RAM, because I don't honestly even remember how much RAM they had. Right, okay, so 4 megabytes there and then 2 on there. And what was it typical on PC at the time? Was it typically 4 megabytes, like on a standard PC back then?
I would say easily, 4 to 8, but like Daggerfall supported 8. We needed 8 for that, so.
So the N64 was less than a decent gaming PC, but not much less, and the PlayStation had a lot less RAM.
Right, but the Nintendo had really good 3D hardware compared to what most PCs had at the time.
Oh. Yeah, I think that happens a lot, though. I think people forget when they, even to this day, when they compare, like, whatever you want to say, like even like a 7800 XT or RTX 4070 PC to the current PS5, it's like, yeah, they're stronger than the PS5 for sure. But like a lot of gamers are still using a 1060, which is really closer to a PS4 Pro, kind of at best, right? Like, so I think people forget that. It's interesting to hear you say that actually the N64 had enough RAM and a good GPU for the time. I'm wondering, though, which was easier to develop for, the N64 or the PlayStation 1? Because the PlayStation 1 just supported up to, like, what, a gigabyte of storage on the CD? Though I'm sure that made some things much easier.
I mean, the both Nintendo and the PlayStation in development environments were buggy and they crashed. Especially Nintendo would just lock up on you, or not so much for me, but for the Dave who was doing the emulation boards, the PlayStation profiling boards, they would just toast up and overheat and crash. And plus we were on Windows 95, which crashed all the time on its own. So we were often rebooting and having to restart our systems. So that part was a struggle. But the thing is, Nintendo had the better hardware, but they had the smaller texture sizes. Whereas the PlayStation would let artists use larger textures. So that had a restriction that way. But where the PlayStation was, because I worked on everything in the front end for Lego Racers. So when you do the character builder, the car builder, I did all that. Except some of the low-level car building stuff was handled by another programmer. But where the PlayStation 1 came into challenge was as it needed, because it only had the 2 megs of memory, they kept coming back to me for more and more memory. Like, we need more memory. So like the car builder, I started with 3 car models so that I would have 1 car model in the middle that you selected, then 1 to the left and right that would swap between the 2. And then they're like, okay, we need more memory. So I had to get rid of 1 of the car models, and then it would, depending on which way you went, it would build it, then swap it out. You'd be able to see both cars. But then they're like, we need more memory. And so I had to just go down to 1 car where it would take the car off, rebuild it, then slide it in. And I was worried that it would be too slow and you would notice a performance hit. And also for the PlayStation, I'm not sure, I think Nintendo also did this. One of the old developer methods was, you still do this today, and I'm sure phones may support it. They're called code overlays. Basically, because I worked on like the front end of the game, that code segment would get unloaded and replaced by the driving code segment. So when you go out of the menu and into the race, all of the memory code, all the menu code would get unloaded and replaced with
the actual gameplay code. Yeah,
the actual gameplay code. But you have to be careful, because if your code's not loaded when you try to call it, it would crash.
Yeah, and so they'd have to put in like a stall, right? That's at least consistent, but always
you'd have
there.
You'd have to manage your code overlay better, but that's always the danger. But you basically have multiple codes, multiple things of code occupying the same place in memory that you swap in and out based on how you need it. And so that would be one way for mobiles also, for the question, to also continue to fit.
So back in the day then, at least this is my interpretation of what you just said, it doesn't sound like it was that much easier or harder to develop for, or was it? Was it easier or harder to develop for N6? I mean, I know they're all different, but N64, PlayStation, or PC, or is it just like they all had strengths and weaknesses and all of them crashed, and that was the problem at the time? Is everything just didn't work? Yeah, well,
it wasn't very mature. So because everyone had their own everyone had their own compilers weren't. We had to limit what we did in C++ because all the different compilers had different bugs. So like we didn't use templates because they would produce buggy code and crash. And so we had to limit, or we'd have a compiler bug and we'd have to change our code. So, all right, let me ask this question then. Quick Jumper writes and says, hey, Guest and Tom, which hardware in your opinion was the best and the worst for its time, and why? I'm trying to compare the hardware of the PCs in the time for a better context. Because, and I think this is important because you just said, like, at the time, actually, like the PlayStation was weak, but it had a CD player. But the N64 was actually a pretty decent gaming PC, but it had horrible, storage capabilities for the game. Like compared to like then and up until now, like which piece of hardware do you think was maybe the worst compared to like the baseline PC? I don't know if we should include the Switch in that because it's kind of different, but I'm wondering if like one of them, whether it's PS4, 360, Wii U, PS5, Xbox Series, like if any of these consoles stand out as either, you can just pick one or the other, like either like actually for that time, that was quite a home run in what we wanted, or for that time, they completely missed the mark. Well, I mean, I think in some ways, the cell processor was kind of both.
Oh, that's interesting. Somehow I knew you were going to pick PS3 though, because most developers do, because there's just so much consternation around that one. But what do you mean? Like, so you're saying like it was exactly not the type of CPU we wanted, but it was also way stronger than we ever imagined?
Yeah, because it was so much work to try to develop for compared to what everyone else was doing. Mm-hmm. And if you, because I mean, the cell was kind of Sony. That was the end of Sony, that like current iteration of Sony, because then you saw them come back with regular hardware that was easy for developers to use. But at the same time, it was crazy powerful if you could do it.
Mm-hmm. Would you say the cell was as strong as Sony made it out to be? Because they, well, I guess that's a loaded question. I mean, how strong did they make it out to be? They acted like it was the second coming of Christ. But like, you know, I mean, like, was it truly a multiple factor stronger than like like it was at least twice as strong as the 360s, like easily, if you programmed it correctly, you'd say?
I have no idea how much more powerful it was, but you had to completely rewrite your code. Mm-hmm. And it was the same problem we had with PlayStation with the Lego Racers, because you had to a normal game loop just kind of goes through each main task, like physics and game and cars, and with the PlayStation 1 and once you get it into you want to maximize when an object is in the cache and in the vector units. So you want to crunch as much as that as possible and then go on to the next thing. That completely required game loops to be rewritten compared to what was on the Xbox and the PC. And that gets really hard for developers to do. And also the other reason why it was Sony spent a ton of money on the cell processor. Mm-hmm. And that was also a liability for them in the long run.
Well, yeah, of course. To this day, I almost don't understand. Like, I think some people like to focus on like the arrogance about it all, or like just being asleep at the wheel when it comes to the mistakes of the cell processor. But I think for me, actually, at least at this point, what I would point out about it is just how much it signifies like Sony didn't know what to spend their mountains of money on. Like this is the number one thing, like this like thing that co-developed with IBM was used in some servers, kind of like medical imaging. I think they used it for too. And like, yet somehow this is also going to go into a console. Like you could say they were arrogant for forcing that in the PlayStation, or like didn't realize what developers wanted. But I think we've seen every company make that mistake. What I would point out is, I mean, I just don't even think Sony knew what to spend money on. That's like, your TV business is under threat. Your laptop business is questionable. You're kind of losing the portable music business back then that they practically created themselves. Like, and what you're spending your money on is this like hyper processor that has like why are you, even if it turned out well, why are you doing this? That's like not what your company does. Like, that was just so weird to me.
Yeah, but the PlayStation 2 had sold really well, and that was when, like, as for developers, it was frustrating because they're like, well, we gave you a TCP/IP interface for you to make games with. We think that's good. Whereas Xbox had the live and the matchmaking service. And
well, it's like Sony was like, well, we did this one thing you wanted, so why did we have to do anything else?
Right. They were kind of just in their own little bubble. And because they were selling so much, they were just high, you know, you could say they were higher on their own product. So,
well, and I would compare that to a certain point to what happened with the Xbox One, where they put all of this money into, well, look at that, a medical imaging camera that like did all of these things, and then like Rise, Son of Rome at launch wasn't on Kinect, even though the original unveiling for it did use Kinect. It's like, well, wait, this was supposed to be the Kinect showcase game. You're putting like a $200 camera with your next gen console to the expense of everything else. And the showcase game now isn't using Kinect. Did you forget to even make games for this camera you've included with it? You know, like I'd argue it's actually very comparable in like the type of mistake they made that way. And why isn't Microsoft a camera company now? Like, but
yeah, I mean, well, that was also, I mean, the Kinect was amazing technology.
The Kinect itself, I 100% agree.
Yeah, but at the same time, when your console only has 512 megs of memory, and you're using a bunch of it for the Kinect.
Mm.
And then Microsoft realized, it's like, okay, we got to get that out of there.
Because we're already weaker because we spent all of our hardware budget on not performance. Well, in addition to that, I would just argue the die of the Xbox One is inefficient as well. Like using a third of the die space for like, what is it, ES RAM or something instead of more compute units. But I have to ask, so we're kind of dancing around this next question I want to get to. Mark Smith writes in and says, have multi-platform games diminished a game developer's ability to tap into the secret sauce of particular hardware? And this is an argument I heard some people start making late in the PS3 era, which was EA gave these presentations. I think maybe Ubisoft did too, and a couple other developers where they're like, PlayStation's super hard to develop for. It's harder to go from Xbox to PlayStation than the other way around. So we're going to program for the PS3 first, maximize the cell first, and then translate it. But because developers eventually had to do that, maybe they were getting closer to the metal or something. And these days, both consoles have 16 gigs of RAM. They both are x86. They both almost use the same RDNA architecture. They have their own little tweaks here and there, but more or less. Like, I'm wondering, despite how many times it probably caused games to freeze and it caused a lot of headaches, how much do you think the multi-platform, all games being more multi-platform and all games kind of working on similar hardware, has this changed at all, like how much sometimes devs program and optimize to the metal, in your opinion? Or is there any secret sauce missing from the fact that basically all games are on all platforms now? And also all platforms are kind of similar, but have some strengths that are probably easy to ignore.
That's a good question. Like Lego Racers, that had completely different architectures for all three. You had the SGI chips for the N64. You had whatever the PlayStation had, and you had a whole bunch of different PC hardware, including bad 3D hardware cards like the Verge and the S3 that we had to support, which were slower than software rendering. Whereas now a lot of things have standardized, so it's a lot easier to get good performance no matter what platform you're on. Plus the development tools are better and the compilers are much better. So you're getting good code gen. And Microsoft and Sony both did a big step backwards. I think it was with the PlayStation 3 and the 360 where they took out of order instructioning. Or maybe that was the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. But that also is a huge uplift. Because then you don't have to worry about optimized assembly.
But if you did, it could be even more efficient, right?
Right. Well, I mean, if the out-of-order instructioning on the hardware is pretty much equal to doing it by hand. And so that immediately takes out a lot of the optimization steps. But yes, the people that work on the actual 3D hardware would go in sometimes and write specialized loops or code segments for what they needed. But now everything is on the x86 or ARM, so that's pretty not ARM. What is
well, yeah, ARM, sure.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, so I guess so your answer seems to be yes. Like some of that secret sauce, some of those secret tricks and to the metal programming that would like really maximize the performance you can get out of a console kind of died like 10 years ago, right? But I wonder if we could even make the modern games we have if you had to put in that much work for each little part of the game, right?
Well, I was going to say some of it is, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S. They're all using AMD processors and graphics, so it hasn't really changed much. It's not like you're getting a curveball with the Wii U, but the Switch is Nvidia, so that's also going to be pretty well understood. So you're going to be able to use a lot of existing code out there that's going to be pretty optimized. What always got
I see your argument. Yeah, but because everyone's working on the same stuff, hive mind level, we're kind of all optimizing it together,
right? And then you have Unreal, which is helping because you can use Unreal on a lot of this. You're not getting these custom one-off hardwares anymore, like the Nintendo's SGI or whatever the Wii U used, which AMD had bought.
Yeah, well, the Wii U used
or the GameCube or whatever.
Well, the Wii U used like a 3-year-old Radeon architecture for the GPU, and then an IBM CPU. Actually, an IBM CPU that had 3 threads per core, which is interesting. Right. But then clocked at 1.3 gigahertz. I mean, it's like a completely different monster to try to optimize a CPU clocked that low, but with 9 threads. It's a bit bizarre, actually. Jessie has learned that if you partition a huge stick, it can become multiple sticks that she can use for different chewing activities. And you can do the same with your PC's SSD with Ease US Partition Master. This piece of content is brought to you by Ease US Partition Master. Ease US Partition Master is a comprehensive disk partition management tool and system partition optimization software. It allows you to format, delete, or create partitions, resize disk sizes, and extend partitions, merge existing partitions, clone an SSD for an upgrade to a faster drive, or even restore lost data and fix Windows startup issues with one-click repairs. Support Moore's Law is Dead by clicking on the link in the description and downloading Ease US Partition Master for free. That's right, clicking on that link helps the channel, and downloading this free software, just downloading it, helps the channel a ton as well. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out Ease US Partition Master today. Let me see here. All right, so let's just pivot directly then to the current generation. Chris Rich writes in, and he says, do you think the current generation Xbox could have matched the PS5 in sales with a better hardware design, or do you think the gap is more down to other factors? Do you think better software for the console itself or better developer tools could have made a big difference?
That's a great question, and it's been a lot of, being discussed a lot lately right now because Sony's talking about the PlayStation 6 and the
PS5 Pro.
PS5 Pro, you've been right. Let's stick with the PS5 Pro and rumors of the PS6.
And this is at the same time that Game Pass has seemingly kind of completely fallen apart through, and this has emerged through several leaks, ones that are like just official documents that came out of Microsoft. We have interviews with Phil Spencer saying the business model doesn't work, Right. Well, I think the problem more is Microsoft doesn't know what they want to do. Xbox Series X should have been a little bit faster, but also it's hindered by the Series S. One of the things when you've been around long enough is compatibility is a two-edged sword. Because like I started out on the Apple II and I got an Apple II GS, which is a 16-bit version of the Apple II. But when developers looked at the market size, the Apple II GS got counted as an 8-bit machine. And you're going to make something for 6 million machines or 1 million machine. And so when you're making something for the Xbox Series X and S, you're going to see the total number, which is I have to run on the Series S. And then let's see if we can make it run a little better on the X, right?
Right. That you end up being limited by, and there was an article that came out from, I'm not sure if they were at the GDC, but they said that the Xbox game sales are way down.
Yeah, apparently, like, from what I've heard, like apocalyptically bad. Like this is emerging from some developers here and other podcasts I listen to that know some developers where they're like, they're just not even selling. Like it's like a tenth the sales of some of our multi-platform games on Xbox.
Right. But I have to wonder how much is that because the Xbox Series S sold well, and I was looking up and there's a lot of people that really like it for what it does. But if all of them have Game Pass, they're not going to be buying games.
Yeah. Well, and it's the attach rate of a console is incredibly important. Like I think that example I brought up earlier about how like developers, like I at least remember EA did this, saying they'll program for the PS3 first, then the 360. Was most of that probably was just easier? Yes, but I think a lot of people miss that the attach rate of the PS3 in the second half of that generation was significantly higher than the competition. And so they were going, well, a lot of these multi-platform games are starting to sell better on PS3. I think Ubisoft talked about that a lot. It wasn't until late in the generation, but it was happening, right? Like, and that started to turn into this thing where it's like, well, if most people are buying it here, then we have to optimize around this version. And I starting to get the feeling from some developers from this current generation that they're like, well, Microsoft needs to pay to put our game on Game Pass, or we don't know if we're going to bother, because that's the only place it can make any money anyways.
Yeah, and then another developer, GDC, said that the money that Microsoft is giving out is going down. The one that made Darkest Dungeon. Red Hook, I think, is the company. But yeah, so Microsoft on the one hand is also paying developers less, but if Microsoft model was to have this Series S and Game Pass, then yeah, they're going to have trouble getting developers because they're not going to have people buying games for it.
And it's the harder to develop for a console. It has less RAM, split memory. Like, there's a lot of people that go, well, why would I bother to optimize for that anyways?
I don't. It is a challenge but I don't think that the hardware is going to be the biggest. The hardware limitations is the biggest issue, especially now as the game industry. A lot of people, unfortunately, even though they can't think they can make money, you're going to have an indie boom because that's all they can. They're not. You have a lot of people laid off right now, so they're going to be trying. I even met people starting their own indie development at GDC.
Because they're getting laid off from these big studios, so what are they going to do in the meantime? Make a bunch of indie games that should probably run on everything. So you see a giant indie boom coming.
Yeah, and indie developers are really good at making things work on limited resources. And so if they think they can make money on the Series S, it's not. They can make great games for the Series S. It may not be AAA titles, but again, this is where Microsoft used to have a really good. When the Xbox came out, that was their strong point. They had the indie market. They had XNA,
especially early in the 360. Yeah,
right. Because Sony had all the big AAA titles. They had a really good indie market, and the Series S would fit right into that. And the Game Pass, if they go
with that, if they actually pay them enough,
they can't focus on. They're also trying to do AAA. When the real sense would be, if you want to do AAA, do it for the Sony.
Yeah, because that's where the people go out and buy $70 games. Yeah, and it's interesting too, though. If they don't capitalize on this correctly, I think all of these indie devs are just going to program for the Switch too.
Yeah,
I mean, perfect, right?
Well, even Sony's gotten much better with providing dev kits, and because they're easy to develop for now too. So I don't.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you actually at this point. I mean, if you ask me, I think the Series X should have had unified memory, 20 gigabytes. Obviously, should have been clocked a little faster. Eat the extra cost. Now they're selling it for $400 anyway, so clearly they could have afforded to take the loss to get to that point where it would have been easily stronger than the PS5. The Series S, I think, I heard recently that they really struggled with if they should go with 10 or 12 gigabytes. Duh, you should have gone with 12 gigabytes for the Series S. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest mistake that they really made is a combination of, kind of squandering their mind share at the end of the previous gen, or just the entire previous gen, actually, but then also not coming back strong with what they want their vision to be. Like, you can shit on the Xbox One as much as you want, but they had a vision. It just didn't really work at all. Yeah. Like, they came in and they said, this is your DVR device with Kinect and all of this. They had a plan. I feel like with the Series X, they just came in and they just started yelling teraflops, right, until they left the room. And they didn't really say, well, is this launching with a Halo? No. Okay. Well, there's Game Pass. Yeah, but we also like it when you buy games. But, they should have just come in it comes with a year Game Pass for free or something. And we have all these games on it. Or Game Pass is there, but actually we're going to focus on having AAA games you can buy separately. They really do either. And I think it's slowly turned into this situation where there's just not really a reason to buy it. That, yes, the hardware could have been better, but it's just the lack of vision. I really am starting to really just lean into that more and more. That's just, what is the one sentence argument? It can't just be you have more teraflops, Compressor Earthblocks writes in and he says, hey, Tom and Hal, what do you think the weakest point of the current consoles are? They have all right CPUs and GPUs, very fast I/O, custom audio, but I still find, besides maybe first-party games that are optimized for the PS5, that a lot of games seem to be running 1080p to 1440p at this point and struggle to maintain a locked 60 frames per second, which isn't a high frame rate or high resolution target anymore. Some games, such as Final Fantasy 16, even dropped to as low as 720p on the PS5. Is this due to a weakness in hardware design and software issues like game engines and APIs, or is this because of the developers themselves? I think there's a bit of that. I mean, I remember hearing with Final Fantasy 16 that like the game was, I hope I'm remembering correctly, I think it was them. The game was basically ready half a year or a year before it came out, but they were like, this thing just runs so bad that we cannot release it running at this resolution and frame rate. And they got it to a level where they were finally happy with it. So I think there's some of that there, although I would also point out, people, that this is the 4th year of the consoles, and the PS4 and Xbox One were like doing 900p 30 at this point on a lot of games. I just want to point that out, that like, and then that's when like 120 hertz gaming really took off on PC. Well, they were still running 30 frames, so I wouldn't say 60 there, 120 here is that different than last gen. But I mean, I'm curious what you think about that. Like, is there any main weakness in these consoles that you see that you think really sticks out to you at this point?
These are all good questions today, and this is another one. I think the difficulty is I'll answer this with a personal story. When also on Hunter the Reckoning, you know, it was a tough schedule. We worked all really hard, and the one person said that, you know, what helped us, even though it made it really difficult for us, is that we didn't know any better. So we just tried to do it all. And developers always want to make the game so great. And unfortunately, you know, I think what's dangerous for us is that, like, I don't think most developers have a 3090 or a 4090 at their desk. But what they have now is more powerful than the consoles. And so usually, like for us, when we're working on consoles, we mainly do a PC version. And then we'll later run it. Only a few of us will actually run it on the console. There's more, because everyone has a PC. There's only a few dev kits around. And so I just think that developers are overly ambitious, and they just want to make the game great. And it just exceeds what the hardware can do.
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny. I was talking to Brian Heemskirk, who's a developer who's been on the show many times offline recently, and he talked about like he warned me. We'll see if this pans out, Brian, but he said he believes that in the next few years we're going to see performance on a lot of third-party games tank even more. And he said it's because of mesh shaders, not ray tracing. He said that. And I said, wasn't the point of mesh shaders to give you more performance to a certain degree? And he said, well, there's really two ways you can use it. You can use it to get the same image quality or slightly worse compared to last gen, and then double your frame rate or something theoretically. Or you can use it to make it much easier for higher image quality, like optimize per pixel in the distance, like it knows what to do, like what detail to show. And it makes development easier, and the image quality is better, but the performance is way worse. And he said, unfortunately, that is the direction they are going in with modern hardware on these consoles, especially once PCs start to become this bit stronger. So I guess we'll see what happens to the PS5 Pro. But he said outside of first-party games, and it won't be all third-party, but the occasional third-party game is going to keep having disappointing levels of performance because of this.
Yeah, and I just see it more as developers. I mean, you see this frustration even in PC games, because even though the low-end cards have had decent uplift, it still can't run these games well. And it doesn't run them well enough for people that they're satisfied with, and they want them to be even faster. And the consoles are also struggling from this. And so I see it more just from not having sharper focus.
So I actually just touched on the PlayStation 5 Pro there, or we both have a couple of times. Chris Rich and Compressed Earth Blocks right, and we just kind of combined their questions. They ask, what are your fellow developers' thoughts on the PS5 Pro? Does it seem tame compared to last gen? And also, if you were in charge of setting the specifications for the PS5 Pro, is there anything you would have done differently and why? And I know you just got back from GDC. And this doesn't have to be part of your question, but I actually am curious if there's been a bit of buzz there from people about what they think about what's been rumored about it right now. And then just in general, I'm wondering what you kind of think about this console that seems to be focusing on more raw performance, but really seemingly only enough to top off the frame rates and variable refresh games. And then after that, they're just like, hey, we're going to crank up ray tracing and we're going to add PSSR to make the image quality better for a much cheaper computational amount of investment than if we were to just go for like 100 teraflops or something. I'm curious what you or anyone else you talk to thinks about that.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to talk to anyone about that particular thing, the PlayStation 5 Pro. But Sony is kind of, in some ways they're limited in what they can do, because you don't want, again, you have to be compatible, and you can't break games that are in development. If you make it too powerful, then the PlayStation 5 would suffer. Mm-hmm. So this is an easy way for them to, you make it a little bit better. Obviously, the ray tracing would give people, where they have existing games that could use it, you can enable it.
Which a lot of them have some ray tracing mode. It could be as easy as a toggle to turn it up for the PS5 Pro version.
Right, because a lot of them are coming from PC with the Nvidia and AMD cards. So, yeah, but you can't make it too powerful, because not only that, developers need time to plan for it. Mm-hmm. You just can't say, oh, we're going to give you 50% more performance and immediately for games that are halfway in development. That's one reason why I believe Sony's already coming with your PlayStation 6 rumors. Developers need to know that now, because they're already working on those games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such an interesting point, too, that like the games that will be launching on PlayStation 6, some of them are already in development right now. Just add 5 years, right? Yeah. They're going to be on there. Yeah.
And but there's a limit to how much games right now can use, because they're already budgeted, and they're halfway in development for the PlayStation 5. You just can say, oh, we're going to give you all this extra all this extra hardware, and good luck getting more art staff and this and that for it. So, but the other thing though is to answer the question is like, why is the frame rate so bad? It's the game struggling to keep frame rate. A lot of games just need the resources now to get the frame rate people want.
No, but it's so interesting you brought that up, like, because I think we talked about that a little bit offline too. Like, it was something I didn't really think about, because you see people, you see like people arguing on Reddit and stuff, and they're just like, oh, I was hoping the PS5 Pro would have Zen 5 and it would have RDNA 5 and 100 compute units and 32 gigs of RAM. Who cares if it was $700? I'd pay it. But what these people, and I think this is an easy thing to forget as a consumer outside of the industry, all of these games that will be running on the PS5 Pro, if a game takes 3 to 5 years to make, well, yeah, okay, so that means that the last games that will come out as only PS5, not also PS6 games, those games are probably like halfway through their development already. And they're not going to rewrite the engine to optimize for Zen 5. They can obviously throw more teraflops at the problem pretty easily, I'm sure, but they won't be doing it in an optimized way. And so Sony's looking at this and going, like, all of the games that launch on PS5 Pro, like later this year with PS5 Pro enhanced on, they have to get any enhancement when it comes out. They all need to be the easiest knobs to turn. What are the easiest knobs to turn? Ray tracing. Turn the knob, more rays. We're done. Go home. A little bit higher frame rates, not a ton more. Just that if they made it so the game loses frame rates sometimes in a section, now it won't on the PS5 Pro. And then also we'll just plug in PSSR to a degree that like they almost don't even need to do it. They basically need to flip a switch or close to flip a switch and do a round of Q&A or something. That's all we can expect them to use anyways in an optimized manner without kind of just throwing money away. And, that's what I would point out to people. It's like, and again, you brought this up to me before we started recording. I just thought it was so brilliant. Like, people need to understand that, yes, if the console was twice as powerful for $800 or something, it would look better than the current one they're going to release, but it wouldn't look twice as good because it wouldn't have that round of optimization. What Sony's gaining is the optimization of the PS5, like 50% to double or whatever, not quadruple the performance. And they need to think about, like, is it worth charging $800 for something that only seems 3 times better, or keeping it at $500 for something that feels 2 times better because they didn't have to spend all that extra effort on it or something, right?
Yeah, and more importantly, Sony is completely different now than the one that we talked about for the PlayStation 3. They are very developer focused, and like when their hardware is based on what they see developers want to do, and so they make hardware that wants to do it well, and how the best way to do it in an economical manner. And so, like for the PlayStation 5 Pro, they know what their developers want to do and what would be easy for them to do right now. And such as like more ray tracing, a little bit better bandwidth, or graphics uplift. Yeah, and so a little bit faster processor, but you don't really want to change that too much in case
it breaks compatibility, or they just don't even put the effort into it. Well, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on like how DLSS and FSR and XE super sampling are evolving right now? Because like XEX999 writes in and he says, as a developer, how true or close are we to the statement that periodically seems to float around when developers come on this podcast, that FSR will be the industry standard the same way FreeSync inevitably beat out G-Sync? I don't actually see that happening anytime soon personally, but people believe it and they keep saying it all the time since it can be supported everywhere, and mobile is now the works too, apparently. So yeah, I'm just curious how you see DLSS and FSR right now, and if like, especially, you're just at GDC, like how often there people brought it up, or if there is still this like, whether it's just your own opinion or the opinions of other people you talk to, this idea that like FSR is inevitably going to be the standard. Because I actually agree with XTX999 right now. Might it be the standard eventually? Maybe. I mean, I can see it. It's just, I don't think it's going to happen as quickly as what happened with FreeSync and G-Sync at this point.
The difficulty NVIDIA has is it's only going to run on their hardware. So right now you're looking at just PC and Switch. Whereas everyone else needs to come up with their own API. So you see Unreal with their FSR, you have Sony, you have Microsoft, and you have eventually they're all going to probably end up in the same place.
So you're saying you don't really think it's so much of like FSR will become the standard so much as there's just going to be so much noise out there that maybe eventually people don't really care. Like they're just going to be able to use something and everyone's making their own version.
Yeah, and then people, because they'll see what works in one thing and then they'll be able to bring it to the other one. But whereas NVIDIA is tied to their hardware, so you're kind of feature walk that way.
Well, unless they believe they can keep spending enough money, to actually make it better every year, which, and again, obviously these people are biased. I talk to at NVIDIA to a certain degree, but they seem to think they'll be able to. If this was a G-Sync, FreeSync situation, I think they'd just all be piling behind FSR, but they're not.
Yeah, but I mean, look at how much, because I remember going to GDC 2 years ago, or look how much progress we've made in the past few years with upscalers other than just DLSS. And so a lot of progress has been made, and there's a lot of, and even AMD showed off 3.1 at GDC, which has some good uplift, or good improvements to the quality.
Yeah, but I don't know. For me, it's kind of like a Band-Aid on a searing wound. I mean, they're at 3.1, and I know these are just names, but I think they called it 3.1 for a reason, because they don't want it to be compared to DLSS 3.5. And again, like kind of what I'm saying, like, yeah, I mean, maybe FSR, but I from my perspective, what we're looking at is DLSS isn't going to go away anytime soon. And actually, the thing that would make it go away isn't FSR, but the fact that Epic, Sony, Microsoft, yada, 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 all of their own upscaler, and they're all decently good enough to the point that people just go, well, I don't really care about, like we don't know yet, right? Is PSSR going to work on RDNA 4 cards on PlayStation ports to PC? Maybe. And so if you have an AMD graphics card and you buy a PlayStation game on Steam, you might go, I don't care about DLSS anymore. Not because of FSR, but because PSSR works on PC. And I also don't care about DLSS in Fortnite because Epic has their own version in Fortnite or something like that. You know what I mean? That's like kind of like a multipolar erosion of its importance, less so than like, it does, no one uses it anymore. You know what I mean?
I was going to say, I think Sony, though, wants to do theirs because, well, first of all, it's their hardware, and so they can custom tailor a solution better. They have more control over how much the API changes.
Right. Yeah, and you have to wonder if that's what everyone's slowly realizing, though, too, right? Like, yeah, because I wonder because like DLSS, Nvidia is willing to just pay to have it implemented into a ton of games, and developers know that gamers want it as an option, or at least a lot of PC gamers do. And so because of that, they're, I think, more than willing to get out of the way and go, sure, gamers wanted Nvidia, put it in our game. But then it's like, I think you see all of these other people, like if they think they need control, then they're going to do it like Sony does or Epic does first. Although I don't know if it'll be as good. We haven't seen the comparisons yet, though, because they're like, well, Nvidia's got this brand name and they're willing to pay for it. So that's good. But for everybody else, yeah, maybe we need to start making our own thing because we're not sure AMD is always going to be there next to Nvidia.
Well, more importantly, because I will be the yet another developer you have on here that says, you just can't drop in FSR and then expect it will work automatically for you.
Mm-hmm. Whereas if PSSR is built in tandem with all of their games, maybe that removes some of those Q&A headaches.
Right, and I think that's what Sony's also trying to do is by having more control over it. It's not going to be as risky for developers that, hey, if I use
this, very good point.
I know how it's going to work, and it's not open source, so someone's not, AMD's just not going to change it on us.
And I've heard consistently from a lot of developers too that, like, again, people talk about the load times of the SSD, how it makes development easier, blah blah blah. But a couple of developers behind the scenes are like, hey, man, major point of this SSD and what Sony's doing with their API with the PlayStation 5 is just trying to make sure that games don't go from 3-year dev cycles to 6 this gen, because if a developer can make 2 games in 6 years, they're making double the money. Maybe PSSR is an extension of the mentality again, where they go, hey, they keep telling us like every time it's updated, they need to Q&A this. Let's just be in charge so they aren't kept in the dark as often. It's an interesting point.
Right, because again, Sony's very developer focused, so they have to be seeing that there's some value they can add by coming out with PSSR over letting developers use FSR.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me shift to this subject, though. Just in general, it can be broad strokes, but I'm curious about what you think. What are your thoughts on RDNA 4, which, if I were to summarize, is bringing 4080 performance to $500, roughly? I'm not saying it'll be exactly that, everybody, versus Nvidia Blackwell, which is another big uplift, but at the same or higher prices. Like, do developers ever get more or less excited when they see one of these companies pushing the ultimate frontiers of performance, like Nvidia did with the RTX 4090, versus, democratizing past gen performance, a la the RX 480?
Well, it's a double-edged sword because, like I said, developers always want to do the coolest things. So if they can all go out and buy 4090s and make the most spectacularly amazing game, they would love to do that. We all love to do that. Or like, for the easiest way for me to get something art-wise fixed in a game was for me to put in what we would call programmer art. As soon as the artist saw it, that had to get fixed. So, on the one hand, people really, and developers always want to work on the cool stuff. So when they see the 4090 and the 5090 with all those specs, they're going to want to do it. But I really think for the average gamers, what AMD is going to be uplifting for everybody with RDNA 4 is going to be important. Or, you know, people talked about like RDNA 3, the ray tracing is good, but how many people are really playing ray tracing games?
You mean with like Lovelace, the ray tracing is good?
Yeah, I mean, Lovelace has really good ray tracing, but I mean, AMD is still looking at what are people playing on our games right now. And the ray tracing is still not a huge portion. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's been greatly increasing, but ray tracing still wasn't. People wanted.
Yeah, it still feels like a steady uptick, right? But it's steady, but it's not exponential. It's just a steady linear uptick. There's more. It still doesn't, to me, quite feel like there's a year where it's like everything's, you know, ray tracing. It's just there's more every year, but it doesn't seem to be increasing exponentially.
But people overall just need faster rasterization still right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious, you know, because what you said I think generally holds true, right? Ideally, it's both. A developer wants to see a new monster graphics card, and they also want to see cheaper, decent graphics cards as the baseline. But I have to imagine there's an inflection point where like one of them doesn't matter anymore. Like, let me give you an example. Like, let's say every year performance went up by only 10%, but pricing went down by 15 or something. And it's like, so the first year be like, well, this is a better deal. Like, so it's overall 25% shift, but really you're not getting that much more performance. Like, it's like, all right, so this is a better deal. This is a better deal. After 5 years, I imagine people would be like, good Lord, we're just barely getting to like doubling performance. And the price is like, you know, now we're down to really cheap cards, but we can't even make new things. So like, I'm not going to buy the new cards because we still can't make new things. Whereas the other side of that would be, what if NVIDIA doubled performance every 2 years, but it just went, you know, 1,500, 1,600, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. Like, what if in like 6 years we had something 10 times stronger than what we have now to game on, but it costs $4,000? I would equally argue nobody cares because no one would own it. So like, where do you think the inflection point is at right now? Where, because from my perspective, I think we're almost to that last inflection point I said, where if the 5090s, let's say 50% stronger than last gen, and then the 6090s 50% stronger, then they go to like $2,000 and $3,000. I don't know if that will matter anymore. We already have more than enough performance from my perspective. I've heard multiple developers say if we actually optimized it, we could probably do a photorealistic game on the 4090 right now. Like, that's not really the issue. It's just putting in that effort when no other gamer could run it seems like a huge waste of time, though. And that's where I wonder if like AMD may be able to, if they're not stupid, who knows, hit the price point correctly, they could actually hit a Polaris RX 480 card like at the right time. I'm curious just how you feel about that from a developer perspective. If you feel like we're getting to that inflection point yet from what you've seen people talking about, like how often are people talking about how many teraflops they can run this ultra version of, or how many people are just talking about trying to make the game look good on everything? Because I feel like it's more of the latter right now, right?
Games are looking good, but like, yeah, I mean, like, I haven't seen Alan Wake 2 yet, but I heard that looks really good too. Mm-hmm. But the trick is NVIDIA wants to, well, you have all these new technologies like the, what was it, the path rate?
Yeah. And
so there's still a lot of stuff that people want to use more powerful hardware for. Your guy from Infinity Ward, you know, talked about how much they had to strip out of the engine in order to get it to 4K 120 frames per second stable. But that's stuff they want to put back in there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. He did say that he works at Infinity Ward, and he said basically they know that 4K 120 is the next mainstream standard that will start to become relatively widely adopted. And at a minimum, you know, well, if you have 4K 120 maximized, it still looks great in 1440p at that frame rate. And so this is kind of like the center of gravity to optimize around. But yeah, I mean, that means they're stripping out a lot of the higher quality stuff for if you had a card that could do 8K 60 or 4K 240. and or 5K 160, you know, throw in your higher resolution and frame rate that you want. And if the baseline was higher, maybe they would have targeted a higher setting, right?
Yeah, but that, you know, that kind of comes up with everything we've been talking about is, you know, that guy talked about how they spent a lot of time to optimize the game to get to 4K 120 frames per second.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to take a lot of stuff out. And that's for all these games with performance, if you want to get the performance, you have to take stuff out. And that want to optimize, then you're looking at, you know, removing stuff and getting it to get the frame rate up. And if you have it there to begin with, developers don't want to take stuff out after they put it in. As for the inflection point, I think AMD is really focused on, you know, it sounds like with RDNA 4, they want to, people have been complaining there hasn't been a really good uplift card for the mid market. And of course, the low market's dead right now, but
you would hope that would at least trickle down to that to some degree.
Yeah, or eventually, I think the APU space is eventually going to take that area, just because
it's this close. I feel like they almost got it to where it needs to be. Yeah, because of build cost. If you're going to spend $200 to make something, or, you know, you don't have to worry about the heatsink. You don't have to worry about the board and the memory. A lot of people just have laptops too, APUs. That's what that would be for anyways. So that'd be the minimum spec eventually. You know, like the amount of people that are going out there and buying want a $100 graphics card. I would argue, just for everyone listening, that market's much smaller than it used to be in general. Like a lot of people just have a laptop with good enough integrated graphics or something. Like, and so if that's the case, then where is the room for the low-end graphics card in the laptop market, which is most of the low-end GPU market? That's probably why that's dying for the most part, right? You don't need a low-end GPU to run monitors. And if you need one in a laptop, well, an APU, I mean, I don't think it's all great and bomb costs. I think some of it is that market, the need for a weak graphics card is just kind of going away as well.
Yeah, but I think if AMD is focusing, because they see where not only that, to be fair, I think Nvidia is giving them this market. And so that's also why they're trying to go into it with an aggressively priced mid-range card. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, almost choosing to. They're just like, you know what, AMD, if you want it.
Right, because I mean, they have their hands full with AI right now. And
that's also why I think AMD's focusing on it, though. I think all of the constraints in the assembly line to make a mega multi-chiplet thing right now, AMD doesn't want to spend $1 on that they could be using for MI400X next year or something. Yeah,
but I think, you know, because the RDNA 4 cards are going to have huge uplift, better ray tracing, and so it will be interesting to see how the market takes it. But they'll also have good memory, and I think it will work well.
All Jesse wants is for Maurice to play with her more often. But unfortunately, he just does not give out playtime or kisses for as low of a rate as she does. And I think she's just going to have to deal with that. But do you know what you don't have to deal with? Paying too much for Microsoft software if you go to cdkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by cdkeyoffer.com. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, cdkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product this community deserves. Amongst endlessly elevating component costs, fair pricing on Microsoft keys is one thing that we at least should get, I think. And you know, the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with cdkeyoffer.com for a very long time. And that's because they're good to me, good to Dan, good to about a dozen family members of friends of mine that have used their services. And they've been really, really good, most importantly, to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So support this channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off Microsoft software, or you can also use Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like games. Using either of those codes really helps the channel a ton, and it helps save you money. So use those codes BrokenSilicon and Die Shrink at cdkeyoffer.com today. Well, so I want to ask this question here. I've said it like 1,000 times now. You just got back from GDC. Why don't we actually talk about that for a second? I mean, what was like the number one subjects on everybody's mind that stood out to you? Like, what were most conversations gravitating towards between developers at GDC this year?
I would actually, the biggest thing was just the layoffs going on right now.
I expected you to say that too. I have an article in the description. There are several articles around that of reporters that are talking about this, like who went to GDC. They're like, yeah, everyone's just talking about layoffs pretty much, actually.
Yeah, and even the award show, someone brought it up during their speech, and of course Phil Spencer's putting his foot in his mouth, it's like, oh, this is just capitalism. I'm sorry, that's the way it works. And it's like, well, what have you done to?
Oh, don't worry, Phil. You've made it so everyone stops buying video games with your capitalism that's running Xbox into the ground. Thank you for helping us. Yeah. But
the funny thing was one of the persons I've worked with years ago at High Voltage. One of the sessions one of the things that was big is because you're always at the GDC, people are always talking about what they want to do, or there's like where things are going. And my friend, because he said that there was a session that by someone that talked about how Roblox and Fortnite games are making millions of dollars for game developers.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, I'm waiting in coffee, and these two brothers who had been laid off started their own indie company. And so then what are they going to do? They're going to be writing Fortnite and Roblox games. Mm-hmm. And my friend also said that like he wrote some Roblox games for his kids that then the kids gave to their neighbors, so they're asking to make more. And so even he sees, I don't know if he'll do it much, but
yeah, it kind of sounds like you're saying like this is going to force kind of a new generation in a way that maybe some games for a while weren't. Like as AAA games became samey, then they laid off people. Well, this is going to cause everyone to not only have an indie boom, but probably a boom in like a new generation of game developers that are inspired by it.
Yeah, and also people go where you always have people flocking to where they think the easy money is, and that's right now Fortnite, and it's crazy how much money people are making just doing Roblox and Fortnite stuff.
And you don't mean those games specifically, just games like them.
No, there's like people make Roblox games that you can earn money on.
Oh, I mean, I don't play Roblox, so I don't know.
And it's the same thing. Yeah, and it's the same thing with Fortnite where you can.
Oh, right. But I do know because I'm going to be honest, starting 5 years ago, I didn't even know what I was looking at when I saw a Fortnite commercial. They'd be like fishing and playing arcade games and on a roller coaster. That's what you're talking about. All of those extra things you can do are giving people jobs. Okay.
Yeah. And people are making millions of dollars doing it. And so, but the problem is every year at the GDC, you always have the next big thing, whether it's mobile gaming or serious games, which is like, the firefighter or the simulations or the last year, everyone was disgusted by how much crypto blockchain was going on at the conference, but we should have told you.
Now they're just all going to talk about AI. Don't worry.
Right. And so AI was big, but I guess, the whole blockchain stuff should have told everybody layoffs were coming, because that was not going to be a business model that worked.
I don't really see how those help video games.
Well, you have the blockchain games, but it's just a fad, but all the money.
It's just a less efficient game. I mean, let's be honest. If it's on a blockchain, it's going to have all this redundancy that makes it really slow. So, yay. You know what I mean?
But like the two brothers, a lot of these people, even though everyone's saying there's no good money in gaming, people still want to make games, and you're going to get a lot of people starting indie studios, doing creative stuff, and you're going to see a lot of innovation that you've been wanting to see.
It's just going to come in a few years because they need to build it.
And I also think though that AI is really going to help them make these games faster.
Mm-hmm.
Not directly at GDC, but I talked to people and they're like, "Oh, I used chat." I used.
That's probably the number one thing. It's not like these ridiculous things that they're going to show to gamers. It's just making the game faster.
Like helping people write their code faster and integrating code faster, or doing the artwork, prototyping, and I see that really being a boost to the the indie developers.
Well, so Clean Sweep writes in, and he said, what are the technologies and systems that game developers at this year's GDC are excited for? What were the ones you were not excited for? Was there any overlap between them? It sounds like the AI tools is something everyone's excited about, right?
Yeah, I think AI will be a big.
Was there something everyone was talking about there, though, that you are not excited for? Because you said blockchain before.
Well,
is there an example
was
now?
Last year. I did try to talk to some people about the Xbox and Microsoft and being completely directionless, and they all agreed on that one. So,
directionless.
Yes.
So the pessimism there is there on Xbox. Like if you bring it up with a game developer, because I've been focusing more so on like leaks of next gen consoles recently, but you're saying like if you talk to them, maybe someone's talking about the PS5 Pro, someone's talking about the Switch 2. If you bring up the Xbox, it's a more pessimistic conversation usually.
Right, because it's, you don't, developers, I've said developers need to know what they're going to be doing in a couple of years. What's going to be, you don't know what Microsoft wants in 2 years, let alone 3 or 4.
From what I've heard, Microsoft seems like they are making a next-gen console, but they started its development years after Sony started the PS6, and that means that like any games on that aren't started yet. It's like because people don't know what it is. I still don't think people listening to this understand how big of a deal that is. Like how much that could hold back the optimization or just the ability to have a lot of launch games. Yeah,
but also the and in some ways the hardware shouldn't be important if Microsoft was focusing more on indie games and the Game Pass, where the Game Pass would be like not AAA titles. There's still a lot they could do, but they don't.
They don't know.
You just didn't buy Activision to do. You bought Activision for AAA titles, though. So, one thing I did see, AMD at GDC talked about how they. I forget the exact term, but they're able to improve the frame rate by having the graphics card do more of the workload. And I think that will also help.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, they're going to be using graphics cards for everything, whether it's running small AI stuff for the game or streaming in assets, which is, I think, a thing that I have to keep reminding people about when you look at PC specs versus console. Yes, in some situations, this, whatever it is, 61 teraflop, 7900 XTX, that is 6 times the teraflops, although that's not a direct, there's dual issue, so you might actually compare it to more like 3 times. But the teraflops of the PS5 in performance, it's a lot stronger, and there will be times where it feels 3 times stronger. But also, there's going to be times where it's trying to run this one. I guess AI is not a good example now, but like it's going to have to run this one 3D audio thing. It's going to have to stream in these assets, and you're going to start eating into that performance. So there's like a reason you want like a stronger raw performance graphics card than the equivalent console, because the consoles have all of these I/O things that are handling things the graphics card can't do. But they're going to make it all work and work smoothly, but it will eat into performance over time, Well,
no, this was where they're offloading more of the rasterization pipeline, because normally it was being done on the processor side, but it's going to be done by the graphic card side, and it did like another 30% uplift or something. And
now, is that because the CPU is freed up, or is that because of the right? But so exactly, see, like that's what they're going to do to make up for that with the CPU, like to make it run there.
But this is also, I think, going to be helpful, because what is the issue with the 4090 right now?
Yeah, it's CPU bottlenecks.
It's CPU bottlenecks. So if you can get more of it over to the GPU, and that's going to help a lot of these people that have solar cards that go out and buy, or solar processors that go out and buy these newer cards.
Yeah. Well, let me see here. Let me just start running in. I've got some final questions here just about game development in general that I think might be fun to get to. XTX999 writes in. He says, hello, guest. As someone who worked on the Saints Row series, What are your opinions on how it unfortunately turned out? Because you didn't work on Saints on the latest one, or the one right before that, I don't think. But like, I don't know if you have any feelings on what's happened with that series, because I think it was 2 and 3 were really good or something. I'm trying to remember. Like, let me check, because I don't want to get this wrong, because it actually is important which one we're talking about. So I think with Saints Row 4, oh wow, that's all the way from 2013. Yeah. So, but that was like the last real one. Okay, I've reminded myself that, and then Get Out of Hell. So after those games, the newest one was a complete departure, pretty much. And I feel like it might just be one of those games that wasn't bad, but wasn't great, and kind of just released in a state where like it just got lost in the shuffle. I'm wondering how you feel about it.
Well, this is a good question. The Saints Row issue actually, in Volition closing, was a little personal for me, because it's not every day a studio I've done work for has closed.
Right. And
even though I never officially worked at Volition, I did get an email one day saying to come pick up my parking pass. So that was. I was like, but I don't work here. I'm in Chicago, and you guys are down in Champaign-Urbana. But I to answer your question, I'll relate probably what happened with, and I still had friends working there who worked on the most recent games. So, it's sad that they had to lose their jobs. But I'll use an example. When we were working on Hunter the Reckoning, Interplay was our publisher. And Interplay was going bankrupt. But Interplay at that time was doing one thing really well, which was find people to buy their IP, and companies. They found someone to buy Shiny for like $50 million. But they found Vivendi Universal to buy Hunter, the IP for Hunter, and the 2 sequels we were working on for $15 million. Now, the thing, though, is Interplay was going broke. So we were doing... The first game had sold like 800,000 copies, but it had been a really good hit. And we were all excited because we were going to do a PlayStation version, which had like a huge install base compared to the Xbox. But the thing, though, is Vivendi had just spent $15 million for this franchise. 2 super low budget knockoffs is probably not maybe what Vivendi would want to do versus Interplay. Because we were just trying to get games out to make money for Interplay. When we got the games out, now these are all public, everything I'm saying here is public information. So the first couple months of sales for the Xbox, Wayward and Redeemer, were about 50,000 total sales between the 2.
Oh my God. Yeah, not good.
And so then Vivendi realized they had no idea what they were doing, and that was it for any future Hunter games. Even though they had spent $15 million to acquire the franchise, even though we gave them 2 games to sell, they didn't know how to sell them. And
you believe that's basically what happened with Saints Row?
Well, with Saints Row, THQ was going under. Saints Row 4 started off as a DLC, but then got turned into a full-fledged project because they could charge more.
That makes so much sense, because it almost felt like a DLC, and that it was like the same thing, but they had a new spin on it. Yeah, and
then that's what the Saints Row DLC. That's what I worked on, was the Enter the Dominatrix mockumentary about what happened to what the DLC was supposed to be like. And but the thing, though, is it turned into code like hell. They generated a lot of technical debt. Deep Silver they wanted the franchise. They wanted to do so much with Saints Row, but they had so much technical debt from all this coding like heck to get this game quickly turned out. And also all the developers left, like Steve Jaros, the creative writer for all the Saints Rows, he left, and a lot of the original team left. And it took them years to write the new game, and it's just hard for a new team after many, they weren't expecting to fund, Volition had like 150 people, and, you can't fund 150 developers for 5 years if you're not expecting it.
You know, do you have any worry that some of this stuff could be happening too with like Bethesda and Microsoft? Because I can't help but look at what's going on there with all the games that have been bought up by Microsoft haven't had the release cadence I think a lot of people were expecting. And I've heard quite a mixed bag of things at Bethesda Studios right now. And StarCraft turned out better than what some people were worried about. But on the whole, not as well as I think most people were expecting. Do you think there's any concern this could start what you just described that we've already seen happen multiple times in this industry, that this could happen to a bunch of other companies pretty soon as well, that are just bought up with some intention and then they didn't really know what they wanted to do with the studio? They just thought it would make everything without a good partner leading them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's always the problem. I mean, you look at Embracer, they just, unloaded Gearbox for a third of what they paid for it 2 years ago. And more friends of mine.
What a waste of money. God.
Right, because, you buy companies and you think you can do stuff with it, and then now the Embracer guys like, yeah, we're trying to figure out how to embrace making good games again. And but again, they owned Volition at the time, so they shut down the studio.
And it's like Phil Spencer, this is capitalism. Yeah, this is like idiots with too much money than they know what to do with, ruining a bunch of studios is what this is. And then a few people who cashing out. That's what that really is. I had
a similar conversation with Todd when I left Bethesda.
Todd Howard.
Yes, Todd Howard. I said, I was unhappy. Nettermerse was the most painful thing I have ever worked with. And years later, when one of my coworkers went to work at Gamebryo, he was trying to hire me. And I said, that is the one thing I will never work on. And now maybe it had gotten better to where I could work on it. But I told Todd, because they were starting up again. And I thought after Lego Racers, where I wrote all this cross-platform code, and I could do better for Morrowind versus Daggerfall. But I was still it was still going to be too much for me. But I told Todd, I was like, this code that you're writing is so valuable. Because with Lego Racers, we wrote this cross-platform code and I was working on an engine code that was being used in multiple games and being reused and leveraged, and really, it was really productive, I felt. And I said, this code that you're working on for Morrowind and Daggerfall, or Morrowind, and is going to be around for a long time. It is probably going to be one of your most important assets. And he said, I really get what you're saying, but I still expect for what would become Oblivion to rewrite it all. But here we are 25 years later, still with Nettermerse.
Yeah.
Holding
yeah. Why do you think that would be? Because he didn't do it for Oblivion. Why not Elder Scrolls, Skyrim?
Yeah, I mean, but that's just it, is he wanted to rewrite it all, but here we are still stuck with this engine 25 years later. And that's, again, my point is this code that you write ends up being around a lot longer than you think. Even Unreal, I play a lot of Satisfactory, and they ran into a 2 gigabyte save game limit because it's a legacy thing in the engine. And even though the game can use 64 gigs, if it unpacks to more, I think that the new version may finally fix that. But you see all these legacy decisions around decades later.
Well, and I know what it's like to just, a good example of what I'm about to say, I think would be kind of like the stuff behind me here. I moved into this house 8 months ago, I think, somewhere around there. And it started out as a blank room. And then I found a way to I can just put a couple of light bulbs on here. That'll change colors. And I did that for months. Then I ordered stuff. And that fireplace thing was just sitting there for a month. And then I finally assembled half of the stuff behind me a couple months ago. And then the rest of it just sat around for 2 months. And then I finally got around to doing it. And the reason it took me so long, and I'm still not done, I still got to clean up. Again, what people don't know is all around here is pretty much chaos that I need to fix and sort and organize and throw away things from moving 8 months ago. But, that happens because, I just got, PlayStation 5 Pro information. I could have assembled this today. We're going to do that first, and make that video. And I imagine that's a similar thing in a lot of game studios. Is they're like, well, we want to rewrite the engine, but this is selling well. We got to work on DLC. Oh yeah, you start working on the storyline for the next game. You start writing the dialogue for the next game, and you work on the game engine. Well, finish the DLC first, and then maybe we'll work on the game engine. And then out of nowhere, the dialogue, the storyline's done, and the person who was supposed to rewrite the engine didn't. And you think it's just always that, or do you think there's something else to these engines not being updated? Because like DICE isn't perfect, but like they have rewrote their engine several times. Guerrilla's rewrote their engine several times at Decima, with Decima, Naughty Dog, and other. I know some studios that like have rewrote their engine every console generation. Do you think it's just a culture thing or an unwillingness to hire a dedicated engine team? Because like I think DICE just has a dedicated engine team, so they can do it on the side. Or like, how can that happen that they would think, we're going to do it for Oblivion, they don't. And now we are with Starfield, and they still haven't. Like, how is that even possible?
A lot of it has to do with corporate, the team that you're working on and how proactively they want to do the right thing. And, I'll use Volition now. When after we worked on Enter the Dominatrix, and we were being brought in to talk about Gat Out of Hell, and they were talking about what the game engine could do for ideas for us. They're like, well, we know there's train still in the code, but we don't know how well it works or how it works at all. Mm-hmm. And so, but when I was working on Enter the Dominatrix, the first mission was you parachute off the building. And I had trouble because the superpower code for Saints Row 4 was in all the same section where the parachute code was, and they had removed it because it wasn't needed anymore. So you have these conflicting odds. They're like, well, we know the train stuff is still in there, but at the same time, they're removing other stuff that I needed because they didn't think it was needed. Mm-hmm. And game development is always like, if people think that they'll just, if they're not being encouraged, they're always going to focus on the problem that's in front of you. Mm-hmm. in front of them, versus thinking outside the box. I'm like, okay, if I do the little bit now and then, this will help us down the road.
Yeah, it's almost like then Bethesda Studios needs to just go out there, build the new team to build the new engine on the side in concert with talking to the other people, and then they just have to do it, right? Because it's never going to happen if someone who's in charge of making a spaceship or this animation for that is in charge of it too, because they're not going to do it. They have to get this other thing done, right? Well,
yeah, and if you think the other thing is they have all these games still, like Elder Scrolls 6 is under development, and Fallout. You have all these games in development, so it's very hard to streamline in major engine improvements, because you still mm-hmm. have the DLCs, you have all these projects dependent on the way it works right now.
Chris Rich writes in, he says, let's say you are starting a new game development company. Would you create your own game engine or use a third-party one? If you think that using a third-party game engine would be better, why do you think so many companies continue to use their own custom game engine? Do you think it would be better for the industry to consolidate down to a smaller number of game engines?
That's a great question, and this isn't a thing that came up at GDC when I was talking to my former coworker. We've both worked on dozens of games, and neither one of us has used, more or less, we've not really used Unreal or Unity yet. But if I had to start a new studio with a game engine, it would be hard not to rule out Unreal, because one reason because High Voltage back in the day was doing its own engine, and they realized that the tool sets for Unreal was so much better than anything else. You would spend so much time writing your own tools to just do what Unreal did. And not only that, You can hire if you need. It is so easy to get help with Unreal versus your own custom engine.
I'm sure there's whole companies developed to helping with making Unreal Engine games that you can just outsource some work to, right?
Yeah. I mean, and then you can find help if something's not working in Unreal. Unreal has come a long way in all of its time. But, if you want it depends also on the game you want to do. Like, if you want to do a voxel-based game, you're not going to be able to you're going to probably be writing your own engine.
Mm-hmm.
You look at what game you want to do first, and then you look at the engine.
Mm-hmm.
But Unreal is really getting a lot of checkbox these days. Even Unity is not so bad either, but with the licensing, they've kind of caused trouble. But a lot of people going to Godot.
Do you think that's something like Bethesda Studios should consider doing? Perhaps. I mean, there's no way for us to know for sure, but like, do you think they should rebuild their own engine? Like, or should they just go to Unreal or something? Is it finally time?
Well, I mean, CD Projekt said they're switching to Unreal.
It's true. There's an example. Yeah.
They realized it's just going to be easier for them. The problem is they have all these games in development. Their tool sets, or for Bethesda, they have all the tool sets. They have games in development. And then the mod support. I don't know how much work it would take for them to be the switch engines.
Yeah, I've heard that the engine that they use at Bethesda Studios as well for like Fallout games, I think it's called the Creation Engine. Maybe I'm remembering that wrong. Is very easy to throw things out quickly too. Like, it's like so easy to place things quickly, which they still make these games that are massive and they're hand placing every bottle basically. So like I've been told by someone who knows some people, they're like, that's half the reason they still haven't switched.
Yeah. And also everyone at their company knows how it works. If you switch to Unreal, you have to retrain everybody how to do it. All that's really where the institutional knowledge gets difficult with to overcome, because all of your good developers are going to be starting at day zero, who's been with the company all these years on a new engine, new pipeline, and they all have to be taught. And the game industry isn't really well known for teaching people.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of on your own having to figure stuff out. It's not like they're going to have workshops. Okay, everybody, this is how we're going to use Unreal today. Creation Engine is Gamebryo / NetImmerse also. It's just...
Okay.
It's the same iteration of it's just 20 years later.
Well, let me throw a question at you, because I'm starting to run a bit short on time.
Okay.
But there's one question I definitely want to get to that's come up several times, and I think having a developer on is the type of person I definitely want to ask this kind of again. Chris Risk writes in and he says, what do you think are the right lessons to take from the success of Helldivers 2? What do you think are the wrong lessons? On a side note, I've seen a lot of players and reviewers say that the lack of predatory monetization tactics caught them by surprise. It made them realize just how bad things had gotten in other games. Going forward, perhaps gamers will be much less forgiving of such predatory tactics from new games. Well, yeah, I think they're less forgiving, by the way, when they have an alternative. Like when Battlefront 2 came out, everyone threw it in the trash as there are other multiplayer shooters. But yeah, I'm curious what you think about this, because Helldivers 2, again, and it's something I've talked about with a few people now, it's like, this is a AA game that kind of feels like a AAA game that's exploded in popularity. And this seems like the first big online success Sony's had in a while with a new game. And it wasn't any of the giant AAA things they were funding. So, yeah, what do you think are the right lessons to take away from Helldivers 2? And do you think there's any bad lessons people might be learning?
At the end of the day, all that matters is if you make a great game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of weird what people will be compelled to as a great game, such as when the pandemic came and people started playing Among Us.
Mm-hmm.
That game did not look great, but it became a hit. And, you know, with Helldivers, also that is, again, a custom engine. And even it's using a discontinued engine at that. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter the tech, you know, what always comes first is if you do a great game, everything else is going to follow behind it. And if you focus, and I guess kind of going back to what I was, you know, everyone gets caught up on, when you have a great game, it exposes what everyone else is doing wrong even more. Like I'll use No Man's Sky. They have done, what, 7 years now of free updates?
That sounds about right.
And so they're like, everyone keeps buying our game, we'll keep providing free content. And they're not doing any cash grabs. Even though people will probably pay them money for it. Yeah,
a lot of people probably would.
And they, some of it was they had to overcome a bad launch, but you know, I think they've more than made up for it.
Oh yeah, I don't think anyone would disagree with you on that. Yeah, it's funny what you're talking about here, though, because I think generally, yeah, I think what you're leading me towards is the major issue. The major wrong lesson I think anyone could learn was looking at it and going, oh, it tapped into like an 80s or 90s movie or something, and because of that, everyone played it. I mean, yeah, it tapped into like the Star Troopers vibe, sure, but that's not. It's also a really good game, like, and I think the wrong lesson that you could learn that I mean, it happens all the time. They're like, well, this thing was fun, and they did this, so now everything's got to be in a what is it, a battle royale? Everything has to. Returnal started as a battle royale that they turned into a single player game because they were like, we're gonna fail if we do this. And no, it's just make a good game. Don't think the reason this game was successful was only because it got memes or share, like it got shared also because people wanted to keep playing it. And and it's funny to think, like, when it comes to the right lessons, I continue to double down on the right lesson to learn. I think for Helldivers too is, if you want a viral game, stop wasting AAA developers' time trying to make something that's copying an indie game. Indies making new things. You do the bread and butter, and otherwise you're going to get a faction situation.
Yeah, because the indie games are going to be able to iterate a lot faster on creative ideas than your AAA titles. I mean, even if Grand Theft Auto 6 iterates some great ideas, you're still looking at a decade between them. So,
and they'd be much more prudent to just make another Grand Theft Auto that does what they do well than to try to make a battle royale. Right. You know, and an investor might go, well, if they can make this, they could probably make the best battle royale. Maybe, but that's not what they usually do. You know.
Yeah, or what's usually, anytime you have a big hit, people will just try to copy what they think is successful and not do it very well.
Every game had a knifing mechanic after Call of Duty 4 came out. Every game. And it made sense sometimes, but other times it just seemed goofy. Well, okay, I think I'd like to stop it there. But I really want to thank you for coming on. I think this was a really fun discussion for another look at like someone else who actually has made games, their opinions on a lot of these matters. Is there anything you want to plug? Any company, anything you're working on? I mean, certainly please do if there is.
No, I don't have any current plugs. But thank you so much for having me on. I hope I fit in well on your Discord.
Right, because you're part of the Moore's Law is Dead Discord. I mean, honestly, I think you can only not fit in, so you do. the only times it's rarely an issue of if you do or don't. Everyone brings in a unique perspective on the Moore's Law is Dead Discord. It's only the people who aren't fun to talk, like who are just breaking all rules and swearing at people non-stop, which unfortunately every now and then you just have someone who joins a community who, like, someone's like, well, I disagree. I don't think Nvidia would do that with Lovelace. And their answer is in all caps swearing at them why they're stupid. And it's like, well, I'd say that's when you don't fit in, but otherwise it's pretty hard not to. It's pretty hard not to. And you definitely add a lot to some of those conversations, which I guess I'll just lead into it. I mean, I'll shamelessly use that as a lead in to plug the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon, where you can talk to people like me, Hal, a lot of other experts that work at a lot of these companies, whether they admit it or not, actually, and just thousands of fans that have coherent, good conversations there as well. And I will say this too, I don't want to get into it too much, but I will say that at least as of time of this recording, the PlayStation 5 Pro video was pulled. I'm not going to get into why it was attacked on YouTube or not, because I think I'm getting all my ducks in a row before we make a real response to what's going on there. So I don't really want to talk about it right now. But I will say that one thing that gives me Gerard, Jean-Philippe, who's working on the renders, Carbon Cry, and everyone else who's part of or benefits from Moore's Law is Solace, is that we get paid also from the Patreon. And I'm every now and then reminded. I saw a lot of there's something going on here, I think, with a new wave of strikes on people. I saw it with Tom Henderson. I saw it with Channel 5. I saw it with Fahim Anwar. I saw it. And these are all entirely unrelated people. There's something going on at YouTube. Just remember, the number one way to support us is to support us at a tier on the Patreon. And whenever something like this happens where we just basically have money taken from us and stuff we're working on thrown away, even if it's temporary, I won't get into if it will be or not, the Patreon's always there, making sure no one can stop us from saying whatever we want. So please join us there. That's what I want to plug. In addition to, of course, check out our sponsors. And subscribe to Moore's Law is Dead on YouTube, though. Please do that and ring the bell button to show support. Subscribe to Broken Silicon, your podcast app of choice. Download and give us a review on Apple Podcasts. And otherwise, as always, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and have a good week, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the about/support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well, you can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z Jizz, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Jan Rano, Daniel High, GZ Ziggy, Deke, Nicholas Buckner, MJB1, NES Chalmers, Jem Ferrier, HardForum.com, Valcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregory Sacker, Sarcastro, Evan Dingle, Andrew S, Chris Rich, Compressed Earthflux, 3S Boy 08, Al Buma, Shredbird, Greg Wanchek, Holden Mobley, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Sammy Malas, Blake, Franco Frederic, Jordan Simkovic, Toka, Julian Leak, Thick Dude 23, The Boss Haas, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Travis Gooding, Stephen, Chrysantine, Mad, Zuzu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Greg, Patty Cakes, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Neithra Zink, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Cameron, Wesley Sager, Henry Zhang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Gaiman Sits Reagan, Jeff Sedler, Loophole 35, Jamie Witters, JSMMH, Winstar, James I, Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Pulse Media, Melodic Warrior, Dave Schultz, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Hones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, I7-11700K, Joe Foot, Mai Sharona, Arthurus, Hardlin, Sleshbot, Jason Angima, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Park, Win Wang, Himsa Gung, Tails 2299, Neil Valvega, John Sisyphos 7771, Charles Russell, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, AC, Brian Wright, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Mad, Alex Vega, Freedy, John Swin, Joe Lamartina, Kikum, Elbergun, Silverized 80, Matthew Marlowe, Hudat 42, Penta Winta, Rowan McKickey, Cornster 671, Sprutnik, Jeffrey, Gentleman, Angel of Cake, Omega Doge, Roger Webster, Ian, Paul Castro, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.